Happy Wednesday, everyone. Tropical Storm Erin over the central Atlantic continues to get better organized and is now strengthening. And Erin is likely to be our first hurricane of the Atlantic season before the end of this week, getting closer to those islands of the northeastern Caribbean. After that, a recurve or a turn to the right is expected, but there's still a pretty big question mark on where exactly that's going to happen. In the meantime, anybody from the northeastern Caribbean to the Bahamas to the East Coast, including Atlantic Canada and Bermuda, needs to be watching pretty closely. We do expect Erin will be strengthening into a major hurricane some point over the weekend or by the beginning of next week, and will be a powerful storm, our first one here of this season. So I appreciate you joining me here. Josh's Severe Weather out of the Raleigh area. If you could become a subscriber, hit that subscribe button right below the video. That will allow you to see my daily videos coming up and you'll get notified. I'll typically be doing them around the end of the afternoon or early evening over the next few days. Let me share my screen with you and walk you through what's going on across the world first, and then we'll hone in on the Atlantic and we'll talk about Erin. In the Western Pacific, we did have Typhoon Podul, which has now made landfall, did overnight in China, and that is weakening now. Some damage across Taiwan as winds were as high as 110 miles per hour. But the rest of the Western and Central Pacific are relatively quiet. We have Henriette, which has degenerated into a remnant low well to the northwest of Hawaii over here, and nothing else yet to be concerned with off the Mexican coast. So things are busy. Elsewhere, though, across the Atlantic basin, we do have a disturbance which has a 10% chance of spinning up into a low-end system off the coast of Mexico, like we saw with Tropical Storm Barry back at the end of June. Now, that moisture will get pulled up into Texas, so again, we need to be watching it. The rest of the Atlantic basin, quiet for now, but Tropical Storm Erin has potential to become a major system here in the next couple of days, getting closer and closer to those islands of the northeastern Caribbean by the time we get to Saturday. Here's a look at the United States. You'll see we do have a front that is moving east, bringing some welcome rainfall to portions of the Northeast where it's been kind of dry. Some heavier storms now moving through the I-95 corridor. There's a marginal risk for severe weather. We have unwelcome rain coming out of the Gulf and moving up and over this ridge of high pressure into the Carolinas, where we don't need that rain. In fact, heavy rainfall scattered about much of the Mid-South here this afternoon. And that will stay, unfortunately, it's going to stay unsettled for a few more days here in the Carolinas and portions of the Southeast. And more rain, which not really is needed, moving through South Dakota, as we do have a slight risk for severe weather there, moving into the northwestern portion of the Corn Belt. But overall, the area that is getting the rain doesn't need it, and the areas that need the rain aren't getting it. That seems to be a constant here for this latter portion of the summer season. Here's a look at the Gulf, and you can see lots of rain and thunderstorms with moisture moving in from the Atlantic, converging with moisture that is coming up out of the Southwest Gulf. And as a result, we've got wet weather continuing over inland areas of Northwest Florida and Western Florida as well. But the area that needs the most rain outside Miami is not really getting much of it, just hit or miss showers and storms. We do have this spin up here moving over the Yucatan Peninsula here, and that is going to enter the Bay of Campeche and continue moving in this direction here, making landfall in Mexico by early on Saturday. It's got a slim chance of becoming a depression, but honestly, not a great chance at this point. There's a lot of wind shear out there. If you take a look at the water vapor image to see what the moisture level looks like, you can see that it is consistently moist, but we've also got this upper level low here that is producing a fair amount of southerly wind shear over the system here. So it's going to have a tough time as it moves across that southerly flow, but we're not going to say there's no chance. We'll keep it at about 10% for the time being. Across the Caribbean Sea, after this moisture moves inland to the Yucatan, things are fairly quiet across the Caribbean. You can see on our water vapor image here just a moment that the mid levels and the upper levels are fairly dry right now. And other than sea breeze, afternoon, evening storms, things are going to stay fairly quiet over the next few days. And then looking eastward across the central and eastern Atlantic, that's where the action is for the time being. Here's Tropical Storm Erin. And Erin continues to show signs of better organization today due to the fact that it's moving into warmer water, and easterly wind shear is beginning to relax some. So we will see Erin continuing to move quickly west, eventually making a turn more to the west northwest before it gets to the islands somewhere out in here. Behind Erin, things aren't super quiet. We've got another wave moving through here, but unlikely to develop. Then another bigger wave getting ready to move off the African coast, which I will show you here in just a moment. Here's a look at that big wave getting ready to come off of the coast over Guinea and Senegal and southwestern Mali. We need to watch that one. We also have to watch other waves behind it. A lot of rain out here, but nothing really showing immediate signs of organization like we saw with Erin. And here's a reason why. If you look off the African coast, you're going to see a massive plume of Saharan dust set to follow Erin. In fact, you can see the circulation of Erin is getting a little bit of that dust in there. That's why it's not strengthening too quickly. But you can see behind it a bigger area of dust that will unlikely it'll be a limiting factor for storms to develop here. In fact, it'll keep it fairly unlikely for anything to really get a chance of going unless waves that are coming up off into this area start coming down at a latitude closer to 10 north. They're coming closer to 15, and as a result, they're going into that dry air. So the pattern of the waves right now is that they're going to keep coming off, and they're probably going to struggle quite a bit until they make their way into the Western Atlantic or into the Caribbean Sea, which of course is concerning because we don't have nearly as much time to watch a system before it forms like we have with Erin. Now, Erin is getting stronger. You can see over the last few frames, despite the lack of thunderstorm convection on the eastern side of the system, it is a healthier system. Now, interestingly here, you can see as it's growing, it's pulling the thunderstorms south and west of the center. And a lot of that has to do with some wind shear and some easterly out of the east and some dry air getting into the center here. But now we're getting to the point where it looks like the system is finally fighting that off and is resilient enough to strengthen some more. So winds this afternoon and evening are up to about 50 miles per hour. They've been at 40 to 45 throughout the day. And something we have to keep in mind here, and I'm going to show you in the next couple of frames, despite the surrounding dry air, it looks like it's not a limiting factor at this point. And there's a lot more moisture in play today than there was yesterday. So the moisture is winning out against the surrounding ambient dry air that's in place. And more importantly, we've got a thunderstorm complex in the middle of the system, which is growing right now. Interestingly, we are watching to see if this area of thunderstorms takes the low-level center, which is a little bit displaced on the eastern side, and tugs it southwest. Why is this important? Well, for the fish, it isn't. But for forecast modeling and the future of the system longer term, it could be because if the center relocates to the south and west, that's going to take the forecasts that are there now and have to have them get corrected based on that new track. So something we have to watch here throughout the night is to see if a new low-level center does in fact form underneath these thunderstorms, or if this is a flare-up and eventually the wind shear lets up and we see storms forming back on the northeastern semicircle here. So kind of critical hours for something that doesn't look super scary yet at this point. What's going on under the hood is actually very important, what you and I don't really see or feel at this point. So we're going to be watching that pretty closely. Here's the map showing Erin, 50 mile per hour winds. Let me refresh it here. And moving west at 17 miles per hour, a little bit slower than it was this time yesterday. Basically halfway between the Cabo Verdes and the Lesser Antilles. Actually, a little bit closer now to the islands than it was, say, yesterday when it was actually closer to Africa. Here's the other area we're watching that has a 10% chance of development over the next couple of days, but I don't really think it's going to happen. More likely, it's heavy rain moving into northeastern portions of Mexico. Down the pipe, you will see the only system that has a great chance of forming is Erin. It's already formed, but having tropical storm or tropical depression type winds. We do have the thunderstorms and the disturbance coming off the coast here of the Carolinas, which could make for something interesting, maybe a non-tropical area of low pressure to keep an eye on, which I don't think would last too much longer because Erin would swallow it up. Behind Erin, we are going to have to watch a series of waves that come off of Africa and move westward. The first one will be moving towards the islands here next Wednesday, so a week from today. The following wave that comes off has several more days after that. Wouldn't get to the islands until probably the beginning of the week of the 25th. Those are the tropical depression or chances. Here's a look at the more serious stuff, the possibility of a tropical storm. And you can see really the only thing on the map here is Erin, and that spread does grow significantly early next week. In fact, possibility of something from the Carolinas all the way here to the northeast of Bermuda next Wednesday, and the spread continues to grow. Interestingly, you can see here the European ensembles are hinting that a weaker system may try to get going here near Puerto Rico or Hispaniola around the latter portion of next week. That's still 9 days away, so we've got time, but something that we're going to have to watch. Here's been the track of Erin, and you can see the system made a turn to the right as it came off of Africa. That's because a trough of low pressure over the Canary Islands and to the southwest of Portugal tugged it northward. Once that left, high pressure built back in and strengthened and actually pushed it a little bit south of west. And we still have to be pretty cautious as to where the actual low sets up here. Like I had mentioned just a couple minutes ago, it's got a possibility of trying to reform a little bit further south and west, but that's not a guarantee. Now, we've got 4 planes that have repositioned themselves. 3 hurricane hunters have made their way down to St. Croix from Biloxi, Keesler Air Force Base, and these will start flights around this time tomorrow, about 4 o'clock Eastern time. And we have a NOAA recon flight that is also set to go. That has landed in St. Croix as of about 4:30 this afternoon, coming out of the Tampa Bay MacDill Air Force Base area. Here's the future track. And this hasn't changed too much. The system is moving into warmer water, coming out of that marginal into a more favorable environment to strengthen. How quickly it strengthens is still quite uncertain. We're starting to see that trend now where it is strengthening. In fact, if I hit the refresh button here, we may have a new graphic that shows it at 50 miles per hour. But it will begin to bend to the west-northwest coming around the subtropical ridge here. It's going to move into a much more favorable environment here starting on Friday and really over the weekend where it hits that warmer water and begins to bend poleward. But the spread begins to grow quite a bit. Now, this time yesterday, before I put my video online, or after I did it, adjusted, but the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico were on the very fringe. Now the window has shifted a little bit north. That doesn't mean you're not going to have weather in the northeastern Caribbean. It just means the track of the storm is likely staying safely to your north to keep those tropical storm winds away. In fact, if we take a look at the wind speed probabilities here, you're going to see the probability of tropical storm force winds is pretty low. It's less than 30% for most of Puerto Rico, 30 to 40% for the Virgin Islands and Northern Netherlands Antilles, as well as Antigua and Barbuda. And the probability of stronger wind is limited to 10% or less for the most part here. The probability of hurricane force wind, I mean, it's there. It's 5% for the Virgin Islands and for the Northern Leewards and the Netherlands Antilles. But you can see the likelihood of hurricane force winds is awfully low at this point, but not zero. So we'll be tracking that for you here. Here again is the official forecast. You can see it's starting to gain some latitude and slowing down, meaning it's going to spend more time over that very warm water east of the Bahamas here early next week. Here are our latest forecast models, and they agree for the most part over the next 72 hours. Then we start to see a split. And I'm going to talk about what is going to drive this system. Now, we only see this up to 168 hours, so it's not going to show you the forecast once it gets north of Bermuda. That's beyond the track here of the next 7 days. But you can see Bermuda on the map here. No longer the bullseye. In fact, the spread has got Bermuda on the very right side of the envelope. And the east coast of the U.S. is not in the bullseye either. It's going to be between the two most likely. But we do have some ensembles and we do have some tropical models that make that bend later, meaning rather than it being a direct threat to Bermuda, it's something we have to watch more closely in the Outer Banks and on the East Coast. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. Here is a look at the HAVS tropical model. And it's going to show you how the environment is gradually getting more moist and the system begins to strengthen into a stronger tropical storm tomorrow, and then probably to hurricane intensity on Friday. Now, the HAVS tropical model, both of them actually show significant intensification happening Friday and Friday night, all the way down to a major hurricane by Saturday morning, Category 3. The system will be passing safely enough away from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands to keep the hurricane force winds confined to around 100 miles or less of the center. But we may have some moisture in play. We may also have some tropical storm force wind gusts to deal with across the northeastern portion of the island. So that will probably not cause major damage, but could impact some marine interests. Certainly, I wouldn't be out on a boat here on Saturday or Sunday here. The pressure continues to drop on our tropical models, which is interesting. But the system does have some wind shear to deal with. You can see here some dry air west of it, but because it's at a size where it can kind of maneuver around that, definitely something we need to be watching, as this could go to category 4. And I hate to say it, but I would not rule out category 5 if the wind shear ends up low enough to not impact that system. We've seen it many times here where a storm, once it got to the right size, got low wind shear, got into the warm water, exceeded expectations. So this is next Monday afternoon, and my model here doesn't go beyond that, but you can see Bermuda is here, and the track has not really made enough of a bend yet to just completely rule out the eastern seaboard and even the Bahamas being concerned. But it is gaining latitude at this point. So we're going to have a lot more to watch. We've got a lot of time still with this being more than 5 days away, but every little trend right now does matter at this point. Here's the model intensity forecast. You can see a lot of our models are indicating that now that the system is beginning to become more and more solid, it is going to strengthen. Some of our models go to hurricane intensity faster than others. In fact, we have a few that have it as a stronger hurricane, maybe a category 2 or even a 3 by tomorrow night and Friday morning. And we have several models that go beyond category 3 up to category 4 at some point here over the weekend or next week. Now, the official forecast is not quite as extreme in the shorter term. That's this black line right here. But it does show steady strengthening. Will it strengthen steadily? Probably not. We're probably going to see it come and go in waves. But that is the official forecast. I don't really have a problem with it, but I do think it'll end up a little bit higher up to category 4 by the time we get to next week. Here's the ship's forecast, and you can see it is bending the storm more poleward here and has a 30% chance, give or take, of this strengthening rapidly by 65 knots, which would bring it to 110 knots, which is borderline category 3 or 4 at 130 miles per hour. That's 5.5 times the climatological average. The way it does that is pretty simple. You can see the heat content comes up, the relative humidity does come up, so we get more moisture here. Surface water temperatures continue to be warmer, and the wind shear stays relatively low with some exception here, and that's going to be in the 72 to 96 hour period, which is about in here. But if the storm strengthens faster, it may fend off that wind shear just fine. If it takes longer, then it may be impacted for at least a day by that wind shear before things get more favorable. So we still have quite a bit here that can go on that's going to change this forecast. I do want to show you the trend. Yesterday, we saw it trend back to the south and west, almost more concerningly. Today, we've seen it start to settle in more when we look at an average of all the ensembles. That's the European, the GFS, the UK Met, and the Canadian. If we take all of the ensembles, average them all together, you can see that westward trend for the most part has stopped, and we've kind of settled in more in the middle here. However, I'm going to show you some operational models that have not settled in just yet. Here's the AI ensemble, and you can see the earlier day run had very few ensemble members threatening the eastern seaboard, really just 1 or 2. And then even more heading back to the west, and now we're going back to fewer again. So the AI ensemble is going left, going right, and kind of flip-flopping here, but you can see really not a great chance this is a direct threat to the Bahamas or the U.S., but there is still a chance. A much better chance for Bermuda, but most likely it's going between the two. And the question mark is how close to Bermuda and how close to the U.S.? I don't really know the answer to that quite yet. Here's the European ensemble, the operational. It's not too far off from where the earlier AI was. And you can see we still have a few ensemble members that do bring this into North Carolina. But you can also see that the curve back out is pretty severe. So if something does try to come up into this direction here, it's going to eventually very quickly get turned away to the point where it may just scrape Canada or even stay to the south of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia here late next week. Here's the GFS ensemble. So the European ensemble has 50 different members, some of which show this being a very powerful hurricane, category 4, maybe even close to category 5. The average is a high-end category 3. The GFS has 30 members, so 20 fewer members, and the strongest possibilities are category 3 to maybe low-end category 4. The Canadian model only has 20 members, and the strongest are showing category 3, maybe low end category 4, just like the GFS. And that one's the farthest east. It has nothing coming up the eastern seaboard, but it does have a couple that are close enough to the Bahamas. So we are going to continue to see some waffling in these. Here is the Google DeepMind model. Again, it looks a lot like the others, where the system's at its strongest when it's east of the Bahamas and southwest of Bermuda, but a couple of members still flirting with the east coast here of North Carolina. Now, here's the operational models. Here's the GFS. It's been fairly consistent recently. It's showing it becoming a hurricane by Friday, and then a stronger hurricane over the weekend here. You can see this is actually turning away relatively quickly from Puerto Rico and the islands. And that's something we don't like in Bermuda, unfortunately. And Bermuda's going to be, if this is correct, when we get to Wednesday, this system is going to go very close to the island of Bermuda, which is right here, basically within less than 100 miles of it, meaning hurricane possibilities for Bermuda. But again, this forecast can be off by maybe as much as 300 miles when we're talking a week from today. The average error, at least over the 5-day period, is closer to 200 miles. So this could still change quite a bit, and every model could be wrong by about, on average, that much. Could be. Beyond this, I'm going to show you here the northwestern Atlantic. You will see the curve out is going to be fairly significant after it passes Bermuda. And this GFS model takes it offshore of Newfoundland. Here's the Avalon Peninsula. So you're getting tropical storm conditions here, but the worst stays well offshore. And we're going to have to see if that ends up being right or if the bend ends up farther to the left. The Canadian model is very similar here, although not as strong. That's a bias that model has. Unfortunately, it ends up being way too weak, but you're going to see here that the Canadian takes the center of the storm basically over the western end of Bermuda here earlier in the day on Wednesday, and then recurves it out to sea beyond that. The European model from earlier, well, this one we need to be more careful with. The European model from earlier had a similar track, but farther west. I would say a little closer to Bermuda than to the Carolinas as a category 3 hurricane. Unfortunately, the latest run here's got some people a little bit more on edge, and I'm going to show you why here. You're going to see that it takes a very similar path through Sunday morning, but then does not make the turn on Sunday like the other models. In fact, it gets you a little bit closer to the Turks and Caicos than what you'd want here for Sunday night. And then that trend continues here Monday and Tuesday. In fact, it's got more of a northwesterly track. And you can see finally it makes a right turn, but take a look at this here. I'm going to zoom you into the eastern coast. And you're going to see the European actually doesn't actually make landfall in North Carolina, but comes within 150 to 200 miles of the coast here. That would be Wednesday night and Thursday morning. After that, I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. After it makes that very close call, it does go offshore, but this is within a few hundred miles of the coasts of North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and a few hundred miles off of the islands of New England, Cape Cod as well, and awfully close to Newfoundland, but never making official landfall, just basically scraping everything as it quickly makes this bend out to sea here. The AI is not that much different. You can see the AI coming to within about 200 miles of the Outer Banks, very close to what the Euro is showing, similar intensity as well. Here's the next storm, which it may try to get going here to the east of the Bahamas, but this is awfully far off and it can change significantly, but that is not good either if it's right. And I don't think it would be, but we'd have to see. And then the Icon model, very similar to the European, a lot stronger though. When we get beyond Tuesday, it's actually deepening the system all the way to a category 5, which is probably a very, very worst case scenario, but awfully concerning if correct, which again, it's not very likely to be correct. But you can see here at the end of the model run, that category 4 or 5 here, about 300 miles away from the Outer Banks, but beginning that turn. So what's changed in the models? I've found one feature that I can track that has changed in the last model runs from the European. You see this area of high pressure here in red, that is firmly in control, and it is going to weaken some. You're going to see the weakness in the high here, pulling the system more northwesterly here. Now, this is earlier, you can see here's the pull, and what's pulling it is the fact that we've got this trough up here in Labrador moving southeast towards Newfoundland, the rest of Newfoundland, and then out to sea. Now, here's where the trough is showing up the on the 0Z, and then here's a look at the 12Z. And you can see it's already lifted up and high pressure is building in faster. Now I'm going to zoom this along here. You can see the difference is that this trough doesn't make nearly as much progress in the latest European model versus looking back, you can see it's 200 to 300 miles farther south and east. So because of that, the fact that there's still a ridge here, it blocks the system from escaping as fast and turns it away, but at a much slower rate. So we're going to have to watch and see how this plays out. But these errors are very common in our models. We're tracking a trough that is not even onshore of the western portion of Canada, and we're guessing at where the system's going to be several days later. And that is still guesswork at this point. So finally, I'm going to show you potential wind speeds. And again, keep in mind that this will probably change, but you can see hurricane force winds on the latest GFS. Avoid Bermuda. Bermuda is right here, and you can see Bermuda is getting tropical storm conditions, but not hurricane conditions. That is from the earlier run. And taking you to the latest run, you can see a significant shift. Now it is turning away, but if you look here at the Outer Banks, man, oh man, that is quite a shift with, gosh, hurricane conditions here in the Outer Banks, if this is correct. I hope it bounces back to the right because I really don't want to see this. We don't need another storm in North Carolina, but you can see here looking at next Wednesday into Thursday that, in fact, there's the potential for hurricane force winds on Hatteras and tropical storm force winds along the remainder of eastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia. So we're going to stop here. I don't want you all to be scared at this point. Just know that we can't call it all clear anytime soon because there will be adjustments in how this forecast plays out. And it would not shock me if this European model went back to closer to the GFS over time and ended up farther east. That's what I'm hoping at this point, and that's what I'll be praying for. And speaking of prayer, as a Christian, I do want to end with a word of encouragement and God's word here for the people of God. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. As a Christian, it's very difficult to not want to conform to what everybody else is doing. But the good news is that God is good and that he knows we're not perfect. Only God is perfect, but that perfect will that God has gives us the ability to basically be wiped clean of our past by accepting Jesus as our Savior. And then that allows our minds and our hearts to be renewed by God because he's the only thing that's perfect. We can never be perfect, but by turning to him, repenting, and not turning to what the world is doing, we're giving ourselves an opportunity to change our eternity. And that is an eternal life in heaven in the goodness of God. And that is the good news that I wanted to share with you before leaving this afternoon. But if you are a believer, even if you're not, listen, I'm not going to judge you, but if you are a believer and you're struggling in your faith, I am happy to spend time in prayer for you because that is important to lift up one another. But if you're not a believer, please know that I was just like you for the first 30 years of my life. And now I've got the joy in the Lord of Jesus Christ. So I will catch up with you all again tomorrow, but I hope you have a blessed evening. See ya.